Psychics hired by the CIA to hunt biblical relics, golden treasures hidden in bank vaults, secret chambers inside the Great Pyramid, unreadable scripts sitting in museums, and entire writing systems lost because the people who understood them were wiped out. These are mysterious artifacts from ancient civilizations. In 1947, a Bedouin shepherd was wandering near the cliffs above the Dead Sea. While tossing rocks near a cave, one of his stones broke the surface of a jar, and inside were scrolls wrapped in linen. What he'd stumbled across would become one of the most famous archaeological finds of the 20th century, the Dead Sea Scrolls. These were biblical manuscripts over 2,000 years old, some of the oldest ever found. The discovery would shake up the study of early Judaism and Christianity, but almost immediately there was controversy. For nearly 50 years, access to the scrolls was controlled by a tiny group of scholars, maybe 8 people in total. They decided what could be studied, what could be published, and what would remain secret. The rest of the academic world was locked out completely. By 1989, even though the scrolls had been discovered over 40 years earlier, less than half of them had been published. Researchers who requested access were turned down without explanation. The situation was so ridiculous that the Biblical Archaeology Review called it a scandal. But in 1991, the Huntington Library in California revealed they had a full set of photographs of the scrolls and opened them to the public. Around the same time, scholars started reconstructing unpublished text using computer analysis. The Israeli Antiquities Authority had no choice but to lift restrictions. But by the time the scrolls were finally opened to all scholars, an entire generation had missed the chance to study them, and even now, a few scrolls from Cave 11 are privately owned and unavailable to researchers. You've probably seen Raiders of the Lost Ark. I mean, I certainly hope so. Well, the CIA actually tried to find it as well, using psychics. Yes, that is real. In December 1988, during a program called Project Sunstreak, the US intelligence community asked someone known only as Remote Viewer 32 to locate an unknown target. That target ended up being the Ark, the biblical chest said to hold the 10 Commandments. Remote viewing is basically psychic spying, projecting your mind to see distant places. Is it impossible? Of course it is. As much as some of you nutcases in the comments are probably going to argue with me on that. But anyway, the US spent years and millions on this during the Cold War. The psychic described a damp underground chamber somewhere in the Middle East with people speaking Arabic and domed buildings nearby. The container was wooden, covered in gold and silver, and decorated with winged figures, pretty close to biblical descriptions. The documents were declassified in 2000, but didn't get major attention until 2025. The CIA never tried to actually dig anything up. Even one of the original remote viewers, Joe McMonigal, has said that claiming remote viewing proves the Ark exists is meaningless. You need the actual Ark as proof. Pretty crazy though that this kind of paranormal research was happening at the CIA. It was just the times though. During the Cold War, they were desperate to find any edge, even using supposed psychics to locate ancient religious artifacts. In 1978, Soviet archaeologist Viktor Saryanidi was digging in northern Afghanistan when he uncovered the Dalia Tepe site, or Hill of Gold. He found 6 burial mounds stuffed with over 20,000 golden objects, from crowns to necklaces, some showing Greek, Roman, Persian, Chinese, and Indian designs. Afghanistan was clearly a hub for trading. And then in 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. The artifacts were moved to Kabul's National Museum, but as civil war broke out in the late 80s, the museum was repeatedly looted. About 70% of its collection was gone. In 1989, President Mohammad Najibullah secretly moved the Dalia Tepe treasure into an underground vault at the central bank. He implemented a strict security system, 5 separate keys, each held by a different trusted person whose identity was kept secret. For over a decade, the treasure was thought lost. There were rumors that it had been sold on the black market. After the Taliban fell in 2003, the new government tried to open the vault. They couldn't find all the key holders at first since their identities had been kept secret. Eventually, they located everyone though, cracked the vault, and discovered all 22,000 objects. National Geographic cataloged the collection and it toured museums around the world.
In the late 19th century, archaeologists working in the ancient Egyptian city of Oxyrhynchus discovered an enormous collection of papyrus manuscripts buried in the sand. We're talking hundreds of thousands of fragments. Among them were poems, lost plays from ancient Greece, and even religious writings that never made it into the Bible. What disturbed scholars most was how many of these texts contradicted what we thought we knew about the ancient world. Some writings hinted at secret rituals, while others contained stories that were simply too strange to classify. The sheer volume was overwhelming, and for years, most of the collection was hidden away in storage at Oxford University. Even today, researchers estimate that less than 10% of the papyri have been translated, meaning countless secrets are still locked away. In 1907, archaeologists uncovered a Middle Kingdom tomb containing 2 mummies. At first, the discovery seemed ordinary, but when researchers examined the remains, they found something shocking. The mummies were preserved with extraordinary care, but their DNA revealed that they weren't actually brothers by blood. One was of Egyptian descent, while the other had Nubian ancestry. Their lavish burial together in a tomb meant for close relatives challenged long-held assumptions about Egyptian family structures and identity. The unsettling discovery suggested that ancient Egyptians may have deliberately blurred the lines of kinship, perhaps for political or ritual reasons. The artifacts from the tomb were quietly kept from the public for decades, as the findings didn't fit the clean narrative of Egyptian history being taught at the time. In the Cairo Museum, hidden away from display for years, is a mysterious carved stone slab covered in what some researchers claim looks like a map. It was nicknamed the Dakhla stone. The strange part? Some believe the lines and patterns on it resemble river systems and geological features of Egypt that would not have been known thousands of years ago. Even more disturbing, a few claimed it even shows areas that could only be mapped with aerial knowledge. Mainstream Egyptologists insist it's just decorative or symbolic, but the controversy around it led to the artifact being locked in storage rather than displayed to the public. Whether it's an ancient oddity or evidence of forgotten knowledge, the fact that it's rarely studied makes it all the more mysterious. Discovered in the late 1800s at the site of Akhenaten, the Amarna letters were clay tablets written in cuneiform that documented correspondence between the Egyptian pharaohs and other rulers of the ancient Near East. At first glance, they look like routine diplomatic texts, but a closer reading revealed something deeply unsettling. They contained desperate pleas from vassal states begging Egypt for military aid, warnings of invasions, and even references to mysterious groups like the Hibiru, often linked to early Hebrews. These records painted Egypt not as an invincible empire, but as a kingdom struggling to maintain control. The fragile image of ancient Egypt as unstoppable was shattered, and for years, many of these letters were hidden away in archives. They revealed a far more chaotic and vulnerable world than people were comfortable admitting. In 1954, archaeologists found a massive cedarwood ship buried at the foot of the Great Pyramid of Giza. It was sealed in a limestone pit and perfectly preserved for over 4,000 years. At first, it seemed like a stunning treasure, but the more experts studied it, the stranger it became. The ship was fully functional, large enough to sail, yet there was no evidence it had ever touched water. Instead, it appeared to be a symbolic solar bark meant to carry Pharaoh Khufu into the afterlife. What disturbed some researchers was the craftsmanship. The ship was built with incredible precision, using a construction method that seemed far too advanced for its time. The discovery was so strange that for years the boat was hidden from the public, only restored and displayed decades later. Even now, many of its mysteries remain unsolved. In 2015, archaeologists announced the discovery of an underground tomb in Abu Sir that they believed was dedicated to the god Osiris. The tomb included a large central shaft leading to a chamber with a black sarcophagus surrounded by smaller burial chambers. The layout was eerily similar to ancient descriptions of the mythical tomb of Osiris himself. Some scholars dismissed the connection as symbolic, but the imagery inside was disturbing. There were carvings depicting demons, protective deities, and scenes of resurrection. The sarcophagus was empty, but the fact that the tomb matched so closely with myth raised unsettling questions. Was this just a symbolic temple, or had someone once been buried as a living embodiment of Osiris? For years, the site was closed to the public, accessible only to researchers. The secrecy has only fueled speculation that there was something inside the tomb the world wasn't ready to see. Imagine an entire Egyptian city vanishing beneath the sea and staying hidden for nearly 2,000 years. That's exactly what happened off of Abu Qir Bay near Alexandria. Recent underwater excavations revealed the ruins of Canopus, a city once known for lavish festivals and religious rites that attracted people from across the ancient world. What divers found beneath the waves was eerie. There were massive stone statues lying headless on the seafloor, coins scattered across the sand, marble figures with limbs missing, and even carved docks and warehouses that looked like they were abandoned in a single moment of chaos. Archaeologists believe earthquakes and tsunamis swallowed the city whole, locking away its treasures for centuries. Even today, many of the relics remain too fragile to move. They sit underwater, preserved but out of reach, like a time capsule of disaster. It's disturbing to realize that a place once filled with music, rituals, and life now rests silent in the dark, its secrets still locked away from the public. In 2008, archaeologists digging in the ruins of Akhenaten, in the city built by the pharaoh Akhenaten, found a tiny object that didn't look like much. It was a whistle carved from the toe bone of a young cow. At first, it was catalogued and quietly stored away, but when researchers finally re-examined it years later, they realized that it was over 3,300 years old and was far more unsettling than it seemed. This wasn't a toy. It was likely used by a guard or police officer to control access to the sacred tombs being built nearby. Replicas proved the whistle made a sharp, piercing sound, the kind that could stop workers in their tracks. What makes it disturbing is the glimpse it gives us into the control and surveillance that existed even in the ancient world. A simple bone whistle, hidden in storage for years, turns out to be the echo of authority and fear in one of Egypt's most sacred places. In the 1800s, archaeologists began unearthing mummies in the Fayum region with something highly unusual: incredibly lifelike painted portraits covering their faces. Unlike the stylized, stiff art of ancient Egypt, these paintings looked almost like photographs. The eyes were hauntingly realistic, the expressions deeply human, but what disturbed experts most was that some of these portraits looked like they belonged in a modern art gallery rather than on 2,000-year-old mummies. Imagine a delicate hat made of organic stuff, surviving thousands of years just because it was forgotten in storage. This is the story of a sun hat found in Ilahan in the Fayum region in Egypt back in 1888. It's dated to be between 2,100 and 2,400 years old, so roughly from the Greek or Roman period in Egypt. Experts believe it was likely worn by a Roman soldier or someone under Roman influence adapting to the Egyptian climate. What makes it disturbing or eerie is how fragile textile artifacts usually are. Most textile pieces decay very quickly unless the conditions are perfect. This hat survived because the ground was very dry, but for over 115 years it was just in storage at Bolton Museum in the UK, almost completely out of sight. Its survival seemed almost miraculous, not because it had supernatural properties, but because of how unlikely it was that something so perishable would continue to exist. And now it is finally on display.
In the early morning hours of July 1st, 1965, a farmer named Maurice Massé was out on his lavender field near Valençon, France, getting ready to start work. It was about 5:45 in the morning. He was just finishing a cigarette when he noticed something coming down from the sky. What he saw was a strange, oval-shaped craft resting on four legs, and standing in front of it were two small figures, maybe around 4 feet tall. They were wearing tight gray-green suits, had oversized heads, and large slanted eyes. Massé said they were making a weird grumbling sound. Before he could turn around and get the hell out of there, though, one of them raised its arm and pointed some sort of device at him, and suddenly He just couldn't move. The beings then got back inside the craft and took off. Massey said it took him about 20 minutes to get his movement back. When he looked at the spot where the object had landed, there was a deep hole in the ground and there was a damp patch that later hardened like concrete. Nearby plants withered and died, and soil samples showed a spike in calcium levels. On the morning of September 1st, 1974, a then 36-year-old farmer named Edwin Furr was out swathing his field near Lang. Confirmed the circles, and no signs of vehicles or people were found. Radiation levels in the area were unusually high too. So while the crafts were long gone, what they left behind, the crop circle-like rings, were very real, and according to authorities, again, there were no indications they'd been created by any human-made machinery. This next crater-related mystery comes to us from the moon. This strange image was shared by Scott Waring, and whatever this is, it sits between the Von Karman and Davison craters. If you're not familiar, Waring runs the blog UFO Sightings Daily, and has been digging into strange anomalies in space photos for years. Along with the image, he wrote, "I found this structure in the center of a crater on Earth's moon. The structure closely resembles a ship from the Transformers movie. The object is very shiny, more so than anything in its surrounding area, which tells me it's metallic." Waring went even further, saying, "I feel this craft may be still salvageable and possibly could be used to transport humans to other planets in the Milky Way," end quote. A pretty bold claim. I will say though, the object does have a kind of weird mechanical look to it. It's got angles and grooves that make it look different from the stuff around it. Is it just a rock with a cool shape? Maybe, but Waring sees more, and if he's right, I'd be pretty excited about it. In 2006, something amazing was discovered deep beneath the Morokwang crater in South Africa. This crater is huge, about 43.5 miles or 70 kilometers across, but it's completely buried under the desert sand, so most people don't even know it's there. When scientists drilled into the center of the crater more than 700 meters down, they found something no one expected. Pieces of the asteroid that caused the crater were still intact. That's rare. Usually, the heat and energy from an impact that size would vaporize the object completely, but that wasn't the case here, obviously. Some of the fragments were as big as beach balls. The discovery went completely against the idea that all impactors just disappear on contact. It means, under the right conditions, parts of these space rocks can actually make it through and get sealed inside the Earth. The Morokwang crater is estimated to be around 145 million years old, so finding fragments of the asteroid that created it, that's pretty incredible. The Popagai crater in Siberia is massive, about 62 miles or 100 kilometers wide. It's one of the largest impact craters on Earth. What makes it really interesting is what the impact left behind. When a giant space rock slammed into the Earth around 36 million years ago, it hit an area loaded with graphite, which is a form of carbon. The force and heat from the impact were so intense it turned that carbon into diamonds. They're called impact diamonds, and they're different from the ones used in jewelry. They're harder, more durable, and they're mostly used for industrial purposes. Trillions of carats are down there, making it one of the largest diamond deposits on Earth. For years, the Russian government kept the full extent of the deposit under wraps. Scientists didn't even fully explore the site until decades later. In 2023, scientists confirmed that a Bronze Age arrowhead found in Switzerland was made from metal that came from space. The arrowhead was found in the 1800s near Lake Biel, but it sat in storage until recently, when researchers decided to take a closer look. They found it had iron, nickel, and cobalt in ratios that don't match Earth rocks, but they do match meteorites. That alone was wild, but then they figured out something even more specific, that the metal probably came from the meteorite that created the Kali crater in Estonia. That crater is believed to have been formed around 1500 BCE, which lines up with the estimated age of the arrowhead. This means that over 3,000 years ago, someone somehow got their hands on a chunk of meteorite, shaped it into a weapon, and used it, possibly. It would have had to be forged and shaped with serious skill. At the time, iron wasn't commonly used, especially in this region, which makes it even more of an outlier. It's one of the rare times a weapon made from a meteorite has actually been found in Europe. The Vredefort Dome in South Africa is the largest known impact crater on Earth. It formed about 2 billion years ago when a massive asteroid slammed into the planet, creating a crater roughly 300 kilometers wide. Around the crater, archaeologists found ancient rock carvings made by the Khoisan people, who have lived in the area for thousands of years. These carvings show animals like hippos and rhinos, which hints that the place meant something important to the people who lived there. Maybe the crater wasn't just a physical landmark, but also a spiritual or cultural place for early humans. The carvings might even map out parts of the crater or mark its edges, showing how deeply connected the Khoisan were to the land and its history. In 1908, something huge exploded over a remote part of Siberia near the Tunguska River. It flattened about 2,000 square kilometers of forest, basically wiping out everything in its path. It was caused by a massive space rock that exploded in the sky. And years later, scientists digging around the area found tiny, almost microscopic spheres made of silicate and magnetite in the soil and tree resin nearby. These little beads are packed with nickel and other metals that aren't usually found in Earth's rocks, but are common in meteorites. And because the meteor never actually hit the ground intact, these spheres are some of the best physical evidence we have of what actually happened during the blast. Researchers carefully collected samples from multiple spots, and they confirmed the spheres came from the meteor's shockwave, melting and vaporizing material that then cooled into these tiny little metallic beads. So just earlier this year, a mysterious silver sphere was found in a small crater in Buga, Colombia. Now, a second one has also shown up. It was seen flying over a sugarcane field in Yumbo, about 43 miles away. On June 7th, workers spotted it moving in a zigzag through the air. It was fast, hovered close to the ground, and moved like nothing anyone had ever seen. UFO researcher Jaime Musan said the sphere is likely not from here. Musan thinks both spheres are connected. Maybe this new one is looking for the first. He said, "Could we be on the path to contact? That's the extraordinary question we're asking today." The original Buga sphere, found back in March, weighed around 4.5 pounds. Weirdly, when people touched it, it felt cold like a fridge, but when they didn't touch it, it apparently radiated heat. Some say there's alien writing on it too, or at least what looked like symbols that couldn't be placed. Back in 2007, a meteorite came crashing down near the village of Caracas in southern Peru, not far from the Bolivian border. The exact time was 11:40 a.m. on September 15th, when witnesses saw a bright fireball with a smoky tail streak across the sky before slamming into the ground. The impact was powerful enough to blow out windows at a health center nearly a kilometer away. It left behind a massive crater, about 43 feet wide and 15 feet deep, with boiling water and a thick column of smoke rising from it. Things got really weird from this point on. Within hours after visiting the site, people started getting sick. Over 600 villagers reported symptoms like nausea, vomiting, headaches, and skin irritation. Some livestock nearby also died. A few days later, most people started to recover, but no one could figure out exactly what had caused all this. Peruvian scientists confirmed it was a meteorite, and when researchers analyzed fragments of it, they found iron, nickel, cobalt, and traces of iridium. They also found minerals like kamacite, which only shows up in meteorites. In 2023, construction crews were doing work near an old Dominican monastery in Poland when they cracked open something really cool, a medieval knight's tomb. It had a massive stone slab with a full carving of a knight in armor, sword, shield, all of it. When archaeologists lifted it, there was a skeleton laid out perfectly underneath, exactly where you'd expect him to be. The carving was done on limestone from Gotland, which is a Swedish island. The knight was tall, probably someone important, and this grave was built to show it. The carving had symbols like a coat of arms, so whoever buried him wanted people to know exactly who he was, or at least that he was worth remembering. The area used to be a church cemetery way back in the 12th century, and this tomb probably dates to the 1200s or 1300s. And fun fact, the whole thing was under what used to be an ice cream shop. So the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem is supposed to be the spot where Jesus was crucified, buried, and resurrected. It's one of the most famous religious sites in the world, but while restoring part of the floor, researchers found something small but weirdly important: ancient seeds. They dug down and found traces of grape seeds, olive pits, and pollen buried in the soil under the church. Now, that doesn't sound all that exciting, but those plants match up with the gospel descriptions of a garden being nearby at the time of the crucifixion. Grapes and olives were big in that region, especially for things like wine and oil used in rituals, so finding that kind of evidence under the building is kind of cool. The seeds were found in layers that date back about 2,000 years, so the timeline lines up as well. Doesn't prove every detail of the story, obviously, but it's enough to make archaeologists pretty excited. Right near the southern wall of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, archaeologists were digging in a spot known as the Opal, and ended up finding a stash of Byzantine gold. They found a small stash of gold buried in the floor, like actual treasure. There were 36 gold coins, a gold bar, 2 earrings, and a round medallion engraved with a menorah, a Torah scroll, and a shofar. That medallion is cool because it's Jewish imagery, but it was found in a Christian-era building. The coins date back to around the early 600s, right before the Persian army rolled through the city, so it looks like someone buried their valuables before things got ugly and just never made it back. It sat undisturbed for 1,400 years. The fact that Jewish religious symbols were found inside a Christian-era home also shows that this part of the city wasn't strictly divided. People were living close together, even if they didn't believe the same things, and all that info came from a handful of gold buried in someone's floor. Archaeologists digging in northern Ethiopia found the ruins of a 4th century Christian church. It's the oldest one discovered so far in sub-Saharan Africa. The site's called Beta Samati, and it used to be part of the Aksumite Empire, a big trade hub back in the day. The church was built in basilica style with stone walls, columns, and a central platform that lines up with early Christian designs from the Roman world. Found crosses, ceramic incense burners, carved pendants, a gold ring with a bull's head on it. That ring probably came from somewhere outside Ethiopia, maybe traded in from Jordan or Arabia. There were also dozens of small animal figurines, mostly of cattle, scattered around the site. Inscriptions found inside mention Christ by name, which is a big deal considering how early this site is. This means Christianity had, of course, already reached this part of Africa by the early 300s, so way earlier than most people thought. The area was connected to trading routes that stretched all the way to the Middle East, so ideas, goods, and religions were constantly flowing through. And in 2021, archaeologists working in northern Jordan explored an old underground church built inside a cave, and inside it they came across a tiny lead scroll covered in ancient writing. The church had been carved into the rock and might be one of the earliest places where Christians gathered in secret. The scroll was tightly rolled, only about the size of a matchstick, so they had to scan it with high-res imaging to even read what was inside. The writing's in ancient Hebrew, and even though some of it still hasn't been fully decoded, early scans showed names linked to Jesus and what might be early Christian symbols. The scroll might have been used like a prayer or a kind of protective charm, something people back then would have kept hidden from Roman authorities, which is why this was found buried under the church's altar. Researchers are still being cautious about dating it, but think it could push back written references to early Christianity by decades, maybe even from the 1st century. If that's the case, this could be one of the earliest written traces of Christianity outside of Jerusalem. In a town in southern Turkey, archaeologists think they may have just found the real coffin of the original St. Nicholas, the guy who inspired Santa Claus. The stone sarcophagus was found at the Church of St. Nicholas, which has been an excavation site since the late 80s. The limestone coffin is about 6 feet long, buried 5 feet down, and was found in a 2-story annex of the church. According to Associate Professor Ebru Fatma Fandik, that they didn't even realize they were digging into a burial site until animal bones and clay lamps started showing up. That's when they hit the sarcophagus. St. Nicholas died in 343 and was buried at this site. Later, a grander church was built over it under Emperor Theodosius II, and that's when his remains were supposedly moved into this sarcophagus. In 1087, a group of sailors from Bari, Italy, broke into his tomb and took most of his bones back to their city. They placed them in a new shrine at the Basilica di San Nicola, where they're still kept today. But not all the bones were taken. During the First Crusade around 1099, another group, this time from Venice, raided what was left of the tomb and took the remaining bones. So, in 1953, scientists confirmed that the bones from both cities came from the same person, but whether that's actually St. Nick is still up for debate. At the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, one of the most sacred places in Christianity, archaeologists recently found something that had been sitting in plain sight for centuries. It's a massive stone altar from the Crusader period, dating back to the 1100s. For years, people thought it was just part of the wall, mostly because it was covered in layers of graffiti and chunks of fallen stone. But once researchers took a closer look, they realized that this thing had been deliberately carved and set in place as part of the original Crusader structure. It's built from massive limestone blocks, including one with a cross carved right into it. According to archaeologist David Gurvich, we've talked about a place where people believe Jesus was buried, so to uncover part of a forgotten altar from the Crusader period is huge. It had been partially destroyed over time, and a lot of it was buried under hundreds of years' worth of rubble. In Reading, England, a church relic resurfaced that people thought was lost forever. A mummified human hand said to belong to St. James the Apostle. It originally came from Reading Abbey, a huge medieval monastery founded in 1121 by King Henry I. During the 1500s, when King Henry VIII shut down England's monasteries and looted them, a lot of relics disappeared. Somehow this one survived though. It was hidden inside an iron box and rediscovered centuries later by workers doing repairs. Eventually, it made its way to St. Peter's Roman Catholic Church in Marlow, where it stayed locked away for years. The hand was, of course, dried and shriveled and partially wrapped in fabric, but it was still clearly human. Went back on display briefly in 2018 before being sent to be studied. Experts can't 100% prove it belonged to James the Apostle, but based on its age, the location, and how relics were handled at the time, it fits. In 2002, a collector went public with a limestone bone box known as an ossuary that had an inscription scratched into the side: James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. If it's legit, that's a huge deal. It would be the only known artifact that actually names Jesus of Nazareth. The box itself is real, dates back to the 1st century. Experts checked the aging on the stone, the weathering and the letters, all of it, but big question was whether the inscription was added much later to, boost its value. That started one of the longest and most expensive court battles in archaeology. The Israeli Antiquities Authority charged the owner with forgery. The whole thing turned into a circus. After years of trial, the charges were dropped. The science couldn't prove the inscription was fake. Some people still doubt it, but no one's been able to say for sure it's modern. In 2023, archaeologists in Germany found something strange in a Roman-era grave. A silver scroll buried with a man who died nearly 1800 years before. When they carefully unrolled the scroll, found it was inscribed with 18 lines of Greek writing, including the names of Jesus, Mary, and several Christian saints. That alone was wild, because this was found in Frankfurt, way north of where Christianity was thought to have spread at the time. The guy was buried sometime between 230 and 270 CE, which means Christians were already up there way earlier than anyone thought, about 100 years ahead of the usual timeline. Researchers say the writing on the scroll was meant to act like a charm or spiritual protection. The scroll itself is tiny, just a few inches long, and was buried in an iron capsule next to the man's remains. According to archaeologist Dr. Erwin Emmerling, this is the earliest physical evidence of Christianity in this region, and it changes what we thought we knew about how fast it spread. The Ica stones are a bunch of rocks from Peru covered with carvings that show some very strange things, like humans and dinosaurs hanging out together, people doing complex surgeries with advanced tools, and this guy riding around on a giant bird or pterodactyl. They're pretty incredible, but most experts say these stones aren't actually ancient, that they were probably carved sometime in the 1940s by locals trying to make a quick buck selling mysterious ancient artifacts to tourists. Obviously, the content of the carvings doesn't match what we know about prehistoric times, and there is zero proof they come from the distant past. Even still, the stones have become super popular with conspiracy theorists who want to believe that the Flintstones was historically accurate. Hey, I do too. The Drapa stones are one of those artifacts that sound a little too weird to be real, which is probably why they've become such a legend in ancient alien circles. The story goes like this. In the 1930s, a group of Chinese archaeologists were exploring caves high in the Bayan-Har mountains of Tibet and supposedly found a bunch of stone discs, about a foot across, each carved with spiral grooves. In total, there were said to be 12 of these things. The markings, once decoded, told the story of a spaceship that crash-landed 12,000 years before. The beings inside were called the Drapa, and they couldn't return home, so they settled in the mountains. The tale blew up in UFO communities, and the stones have been referenced ever since. Now, the thing is, there's no confirmed location for the stones, no major museum has them, and it's led most researchers to call this a hoax. But the idea still floats around because with anything like this, there's always the slim chance that it could be real. Back in 1961, a group of rock collectors in Olancha, California found something weird. They cracked open what looked like a geode, a natural rock formation that usually takes thousands or even millions of years to form, but inside they found what looked like a metal cylinder with a coil and a ceramic piece. So people were pretty blown away by this. Some claimed it was an ancient electrical component, maybe proof of lost technology. Others said the rock around it had to be hundreds of thousands of years old. Well, it turns out, once it was inspected more closely, it wasn't ancient. The object was actually a 1920s era Champion spark plug, the kind used in early cars and tractors. The rock wasn't really a geode either. It was a chunk of hardened clay and mineral buildup, which can form around stuff way faster than you'd think under very specific conditions. That didn't stop people from calling it a fossilized machine part, or the Koso artifact as it's come to be known, really running with the idea that it proved time travel, aliens, or some sort of secret civilization once existed. There's a temple in Abydos, Egypt, where the walls have some carvings that at first glance look suspiciously modern or even futuristic. Some swear you can make out what looks like a helicopter, a tank, what looks like a submarine maybe. Now, these aren't faint outlines, they're surprisingly detailed. So naturally, these carvings have been brought up for decades when it comes to ancient alien conspiracies. Proof that Egyptians saw flying machines, time travel, long-lost technology. Well, I'd really like to believe all that stuff, but this explanation is more likely, less dramatic, but interesting all the same. Ancient Egyptian temples would get reused and recarved over time. So new pharaohs would come in, they'd want their own stories on the wall, so they would plaster over the old stuff and carve their own. And over time, the plaster wears off, and now you've got two sets of carvings overlapping each other, creating weird mashups that end up looking like helicopters or spaceships. Deep in the Colombian Amazon, inside the Sariana de la Lendosa cave system, there are cave paintings that go back over 12,000 years, and some of them are pretty weird. Some of the figures look like animals, some look like humans, and some are these strange in-between things. They've got human legs with animal heads or bodies with limbs that seem too long or distorted. They're called therianthropes, half human, half animal beings, and they're scattered all across the wall. Some think they look extraterrestrial, at the very least otherworldly, but archaeologists think they're mythological, not depictions of space aliens. I guess they'd be animorphs. Or animorphs? They're aliens from space, right? And they could be like half human, half animal. Anyway, maybe they're shamans in animal masks or spiritual beings. It's also possible they were drawn while under the influence of some hallucinogenic plants, which some tribes still use in rituals to this day. The paintings are massive in scale, too, stretching across cliff faces, and the level of detail is nuts considering how old they are. Back in the 1930s, someone found a weird-looking rock near a creek in London, Texas. When they broke it open, there was a small hammer sealed inside. The head was made of iron, and the handle looked like it had started turning to stone. The rock around it looked ancient, which made some people think the hammer itself had to be millions of years old. That's what kicked off all the mystery. Some people claim this was proof of lost technology, that humans existed way earlier than we thought and were already making tools. Carl Bau, a creationist, claimed it came from before the biblical flood, but scientists and skeptics think there's a much simpler explanation here, that the hammer looks just like the ones used in the late 1800s for mining, and the rock around it is probably just a concretion, a natural process where minerals and water slowly build up around an object. It doesn't take millions of years. It can happen in decades, again, under the right conditions. Still, it's one of those finds people keep bringing up in conversations about ancient civilizations, time travel, and out-of-place artifacts, including me. Up in northern Kuwait, archaeologists dug up this tiny clay head from about 7,000 years ago, which looks undoubtedly alien. It's got slanted eyes, the long skull, flat nose, very much like a reptilian-type alien creature. The clay itself wasn't from around there. It came from Mesopotamia, so this figurine probably traveled with traders crossing the region. Another interesting thing is that this was found in a regular living space, not some temple or grave, so it was probably part of someone's everyday life, not just some fancy ritual-type thing. And no one really knows exactly what it means, but back then, some tribes used to wrap babies' heads to shape their skulls a certain way, so maybe this might be a depiction of that. Or, it could just be a sculpture of some ancient alien visitor. Off the coast of Veracruz, Mexico, divers found this small jade piece that looks kind of like a corn cob from the future. It's got a cone on top and these perfect little square patterns all over it, carved out of jadeite, a stone that's way harder than steel. No machines, no drills, it was all carved by hand. Dates back to the Olmec era, and archaeologists think it was probably a ceremonial object. Maybe an ornament you'd find on a staff, or something used in rituals tied to corn, which was basically life for them. The fact that it was found underwater adds to the mystery, though. Maybe it was an offering, or it was lost in a flood. The detail is crazy precise, so it almost looks like it could have been made by a machine, but no, it was just ancient craftsmanship. The Ashango bone is a piece of prehistoric bone found near the border of Congo and Uganda, dated to about 24,000 years ago. What's interesting about this bone are the rows of notches carved into it. There are 3 columns of marks that seem way too organized to be random scratches. Some researchers think these marks might represent early math, simple counting, almost like a super ancient calculator or record-keeping tool. This would mean that tens of thousands of years ago, humans were thinking about numbers and patterns more deeply than we typically attribute to them. Way before writing or advanced civilizations, people were already tracking stuff and maybe even doing simple math. There's still debate about what exactly the marks mean, but the Ashango bone pushes back how early we think math started. In Colombia's Cambaya region, archaeologists discovered these small gold figurines that look surprisingly like tiny airplanes. The pieces have shapes that look a lot like wings, tail fins, and a body that looks like a plane's fuselage, stuff that made some people jump to the conclusion that they were proof of ancient alien technology. The artifacts date from between 200 and 900 the years, and they come from the Cambaya culture, which was famous for their incredible metalworking. But most archaeologists think these shapes aren't planes at all. Instead, they're probably meant to be animals like birds, fish, or insects, creatures that were important in their mythology. The shapes might be stylized or a bit abstract, which can look like modern machines to us, but had a totally different meaning back then. But hey, you never know. What is undeniable, though, is the craftsmanship. These tiny figures are so nicely detailed, made from gold so pure it's still shiny after more than 1,000 years. So back in 2015, scientists exploring the Mesquite jungle in Honduras found something that for a long time had only been a legend. A lost city buried deep in the rainforest, filled with stone sculptures of jaguars, half-human creatures, thrones, all kinds of ceremonial objects. They nicknamed it the City of the Jaguar. This place is interesting because it lines up with old stories about La Ciudad Blanca, or the White City, a legendary place that's been part of folklore for ages. Just nobody had any proof it existed. The whole thing started with a LiDAR scan. They noticed straight lines under the trees, so a team led by archaeologist Christopher Fisher and filmmaker Steve Elkins went to check it out, and they found what Fisher called the most undisturbed site he'd ever been part of. He told National Geographic, "This is not like finding a pot in a museum. It's the whole site with context intact, and that's incredibly rare." Another archaeologist, Oscar Neil Cruz from the Honduran Institute of Anthropology, called it one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of the 21st century. Strangely, no one knows exactly who built this place. It's not Maya. It's like an entire culture just rose up, built this city, then disappeared without a trace. Now these are weird. Tiny gold artifacts found in Colombia made by the Cumbia people over 1,000 years ago. They look suspiciously like airplanes. They've got wings, tail fins, some even have what looks like landing gear, and yes, they're made entirely of gold. Archaeologists say they're probably stylized animals like birds, bats, or insects, but still, some of these things look a little too aerodynamic. That's why people call them the Cumbia airplanes. They've built models based on these designs, scaled them up, and guess what? A few of them actually flew. Now, to be clear, again, most researchers still say they're just abstract animal figures, but I mean, it's hard not to at least wonder, how did a pre-Columbian jungle culture make gold figurines that just so happen to resemble modern jets, and are aerodynamic enough to actually fly when scaled up in some cases? Either these are some really creative animal carvings, or the Cumbia knew something that we didn't. In the deep Belizean jungle at a Maya site called Luminai, archaeologists started finding copper tools, stuff like bells, tweezers, fish hooks, which is already strange, considering the Maya weren't big on metalwork, and finding them this far inland was especially weird. Most of the copper wasn't local. Instead, it was traced back to places hundreds of miles away, mainly in western and central Mexico. This proves that the ancient Maya were part of a huge trade network. The copper items were clearly considered rare and valuable, used for rituals and trade, and they totally mess with the old idea that the Maya didn't care about metal until the Spanish showed up. Also, goes to show just how connected these societies were. As one researcher, Geoffrey Braswell, put it, the finds show how, quote, Mesoamerican societies were much more interconnected than we previously believed. It's not just that the tools are interesting, it's how they got there. These were jungle cities with no wheels, no horses, nothing like that, but they still managed to trade for copper from hundreds of miles away. This one kinda looks like nothing. I mean, just an old bone at first glance, but the Ashango bone, found near the headwaters of the Nile close to the Congo jungle, is over 20,000 years old. It might be the oldest known math tool. It's a small bone, probably from a baboon, with carved notches grouped into patterns. Scientists noticed some of the marks seem to show multiplication, division, prime numbers. One column shows numbers like 11, 13, 17, and 19, which is not random. Dirk Hoylebroek, a Belgian mathematician who studied it, wrote, "The structure of the markings is clearly purposeful. This is evidence of a prehistoric number sense," end quote. Now, not everyone agrees on what the bone was used for. Some think it was a lunar calendar. Others say a tally stick, but either way, it's way more advanced than anyone expected for that time. It was found in 1960 near the Semliki River in modern-day Democratic Republic of the Congo, and is now housed in a museum in Brussels. Alright, so this one is controversial. The Ica stones are a bunch of smooth black rocks with carvings on them, found near Ica, Peru. Some show normal stuff like animals, but others show people using telescopes, doing surgery, and interacting with dinosaurs. A farmer named Basilio Uchuya claimed he found them in a cave in the 60s. He admitted to faking some of them, but then he said he was forced to say that to avoid prison for selling antiques. So the whole thing's a mess. Most experts say the stones are modern fakes, especially since no one's ever found them in a properly documented dig. The Peruvian government officially labeled them as hoaxes, but for some reason they still keep popping up in museums and conspiracy videos. And hey, I'm one to talk, but I find these things kind of compelling. Are they definitive proof that history was very different than mainstream science would have you believe? No. Are they weird enough to get my attention though? Absolutely. For years, scientists thought the Amazon was mostly just uncharted wilderness, but when deforestation and LiDAR scans started peeling back the trees, they showed hundreds of huge geometric shapes carved into the land. Circles, squares, straight roads, way too precise to be natural. A 2022 study in Science described over 450 of these geoglyphs in the Acre region of Brazil. They're estimated to be up to 2,000 years old. The shapes were made by clearing forest and digging deep ditches. Not easy work without modern equipment. And what makes it even more interesting is that there are no large ruins nearby like pyramids or cities. These things were just out in the middle of nowhere. In 2021, archaeologists digging at Xingshui, an ancient ruins site in southern China, pulled a massive gold mask out of a sacrificial pit. This place has been turning up weird stuff for decades, but this mask got a lot of attention. It's over 3,000 years old, has big staring eyes, huge ears, and a thin little mouth carved into it. It weighs about half a pound. It doesn't match the usual style of Chinese artifacts from that time though. It's not from the Shang dynasty or any of the big name cultures you usually hear about. It came from the Shu civilization, a lost culture that we still know very little about. No one really knows why they buried all this stuff in deep pits or why their art looks so different from everything else around it. Now this is cool. In early 2024, a group of archaeologists were digging in the Panama jungle when they opened a tomb that hadn't been touched in over 1,000 years. And what was inside? A whole bunch of treasure. There were gold belts, gold plates, earrings shaped like crocodiles, bells, bone flutes, and I never thought I'd say this out loud in my life, but there was also a skirt made out of dog teeth. Yeah, dog teeth. As for who was buried there, they're calling him the Lord of the Flutes, but he actually wasn't alone. Archaeologists say up to 31 other people were sacrificed and buried with him. The tomb was completely hidden under the jungle and totally untouched. And the level of gold and craftsmanship here was impressive. One researcher said the discovery had, quote, incalculable historical and cultural value, end quote. Now, this wasn't the kind of place archaeologists expected to find a burial like this. It's not one of the major empires like the Aztec or Maya. It's just a small group living out in the jungle. So how did this much gold end up here? And who was this guy? No one's really sure, but it definitely makes you wonder how much we still don't know about ancient civilizations hiding out in the rainforest. This wasn't even supposed to be a discovery. In 2024, a grad student named Luke Ald Thomas was going through some old LiDAR data, basically laser scans of the jungle done to check on forest health, nothing to do with archaeology in this case. But then he noticed something odd. There's strange lines, big rectangles, stuff that didn't look natural at all. And it turns out he just found an entire lost Maya city that no one had any idea existed. They're calling it Valeriana, and it's massive. There are over 6,000 buildings with pyramids, ball courts, plazas, roads, and a water system. And the wildest part is that it was just sitting under the trees the whole time. Experts think as many as 50,000 people lived there, around 750 to 850 CE, and somehow this whole place got completely forgotten. It's like if someone found a major city the size of San Francisco completely covered in forest and just nobody noticed it for over 1,000 years. That's how unexplored this part of the jungle is. In 2023, archaeologist Ivan Sprayitz and his team were deep in the Mexican jungle, just hacking through trees with machetes, and that's when they came across something massive. It was an entire lost Maya city totally swallowed by the forest. They'd set out to see what was up after scanning the forest with LiDAR. They named the place Ocamtun, which means stone column in the Yucatec Maya language, and that's because this place is filled with giant stone pillars. They found pyramids, ceremonial plazas, altars, carved staircases, and a ball court, all built high up on natural terraces to keep everything above flood level. According to Sprayitz, when we got there, our suspicions were confirmed. Architecturally, it was truly massive. They think Akhenaten was at its peak between 600 and 900, the late classic Maya period. It's probably a pretty important city, but obviously at some point it was abandoned and totally forgotten. And it just sat there for over 1,000 years, buried under layers of trees and vines. In March 2016, archaeologists working south of Athens dug up a mass grave with about 80 male skeletons. Some of them still had iron shackles locked tight around their wrists. They died in the second half of the 7th century BCE, during this time of brutal political chaos in Athens. These were executions, not battle deaths, and the skeletons were grouped together like they'd been killed at the same time. The project director said this was the first time they could physically see the violent power struggles that eventually led to democracy in Athens. These guys were probably part of a failed political or religious faction that got wiped out. The Greek Ministry of Culture is building a permanent exhibition for the site, set to open in 2026. They'll be able to walk through and see the actual remains, a physical reminder that democracy was born out of some very brutal violence. Multiple churches across Europe claim to have the holy prepuce, literally the foreskin of Jesus Christ. The most famous one was in this small village called Calcutta, just north of Rome. The story goes that after the sack of Rome in 1527, a German soldier stole the relic and it somehow ended up there. Every January 1st, on the feast of the circumcision, they'd parade it through the streets, till 1983, when it just vanished. Father Don Dario Magnoni announced the relic had been stolen from his home. At the peak of the relic craze, though, there were supposedly 18 different holy foreskins floating around Europe. The Catholic Church even offered perks if you visited the one in Calcutta, up to 10 years worth of reduced time in purgatory, just for showing up to see it. Can't get in on that deal now because nobody has any idea where it went. Between the 6th and 8th centuries CE in ancient Mesopotamia, people were burying clay bowls upside down beneath their houses. Why? Well, they were demon traps. The bowls are covered in spiral inscriptions. The text starts in the center and winds outward. You could buy them in markets. Regular families would try to keep demons away from their kids or their livestock, and they'd bury them under their floors. Some of them have the homeowner's name written directly into the curse. They've also found ones with a drawing of a bound demon scratched into the clay with lines of text spiraling around it to kind of lock it in place. Hundreds of these bowls have been found across Iraq, Iran, and Syria. Scholars like Matthew Morgenstern have spent years translating them, finding curses against rival sorcerers, charms against disease, protections against Liliths, female demons that attacked newborns in the night. What gets under your skin, though, isn't the drawings or the curses, it's putting yourself in these people's shoes. They genuinely believed that without these bowls under their floors, ghastly demons were going to crawl out and come for them and their family in the night. That's along with all the living you have to worry about, too. That makes for a pretty stressful day-to-day existence, I think. On May 6, 1950, two brothers named Viggo and Emil Højgaard were cutting peat for fuel in a bog just west of Silkeborg, Denmark. They were working about 2.5 meters below the surface, and they found what looked like a fresh corpse. Actually, the body was so well preserved, they thought they'd found someone who was recently killed, so they called the cops. When police arrived and learned the body was found deep in the peat, though, they realized this was something for archaeologists to handle. The man had actually been dead for over 2,300 years. The acidic, low-oxygen peat had basically mummified him. His skin had turned this leathery brown color, almost black. His hair was still there. You could see stubble on his face, but he'd been dead hundreds of years before Jesus was born. Around his neck was a braided leather noose, and his tongue was distended. This had not been a violent struggle. It was ritualistic. 2021, researchers were even able to figure out what his last meal was. It was porridge, 85% barley, and then flax and other seeds. Archaeologists believe he was likely sacrificed to the fertility goddess Nerthus, who received offerings in wetlands. The variety of seeds in his gut, many of them weeds that wouldn't usually be eaten, could mean this was kind of a special sacrificial meal. Only his head is actually real now. Back in the 50s, they just didn't have the technology to preserve an entire body like that, so the examiners decided to just keep his head and leave the rest. But in 1987, the Silkeborg Museum rebuilt the body using what was left of the bones. In December 1945, two Egyptian farmers named Muhammad and Khalifa Ali were digging for fertilizer near a cliff when they found a sealed clay clay jar. Muhammad was scared to break it at first, thought a jinn might be inside, but then wondered if there might be gold. He smashed the jar, but instead of gold or a demon, papyrus went flying everywhere. Inside were 12 leather-bound papyrus texts. Turned out these were alternative versions of early Christianity that the church had spent hundreds of years trying to erase. The Gospel of Thomas is full of Jesus speaking in these weird cryptic sayings. The Gospel of Philip talks about hidden spiritual knowledge being more important than faith. The codices had probably been buried by monks from a nearby monastery after non-canonical books had been condemned in 367 CE, so getting caught with these things could have gotten you executed. Manuscripts were brought together in Cairo, where scholars worked for years to translate them. The full collection wasn't published until the 70s and 80s. When archaeologists finally got their hands on these texts, they realized early Christianity wasn't this unified thing. It was a whole mess of competing ideas, and some of those ideas got buried for almost 1,600 years. In 2006, researchers at a university in Frankfurt were cataloging a private collection. They found a small gold scroll wrapped inside a lead capsule. It looked like jewelry at first, but once they carefully unrolled it, they realized it was a curse. Cursed jewelry. The text was written in Greek and dated to the 2nd or 3rd century CE, probably from Roman Egypt. The handwriting was tiny and full of spelling mistakes, probably by someone who wasn't fully literate, but at least they knew the formula for summoning spirits. That's more than I can say. The scroll listed the names of deities and invoked them to bind someone. The amulet's owner had carried someone's curse around their neck, right next to their skin. The same kind of scrolls have been found in graves and wells, but this one, being wearable, meant whoever made it wanted that dark energy close to them at all times. In 2019, a team from Associates for Biblical Research re-examined leftover dirt from an old Israeli excavation on Mount Ebal. The site, described in the Bible as the Mountain of Curses, found a small folded lead tablet. It was sealed shut, too brittle to pry open, so in 2021 they scanned it with micro-CT imaging. On the inside was an inscription that read, "Cursed, cursed, cursed, cursed by the God Yahweh," believed to date somewhere between 1200 and 1400 BCE, which would make it one of the oldest known Hebrew texts ever found. In 1933, French archaeologist Robert du Mesnil du Bosson was excavating the ancient Assyrian city of Arslan Tash in northern Syria when he purchased 2 limestone plaques from a peasant. They were covered in tiny Phoenician script. When the writing was translated, it turned out these things were meant to keep demons out of the home. Text calls on multiple gods and explicitly mentions banishing the Lilu and Lilith, again demonic beings that preyed on humans, especially children, at night. Scholars dated them to around the 7th century BCE. Syrian houses were full of small charms and rituals meant to ward off evil like this, but these amulets stood out because of how vivid the language was. I mean, it reads like someone genuinely terrified of what might crawl through the door after dark. Starting in February 2015, archaeologist Raul Barrera and his team were excavating under a colonial-era building in downtown Mexico City, not far from the Templo Mayor complex. They dug until they hit the basalt floor of the Aztec period, and then hundreds of skull fragments started showing up. They had found the main skull rack of Tenochtitlan. This was the legendary structure Spanish conquistadors had written about, estimating it held 130,000 something skulls. And for hundreds of years, historians wondered, did it really exist? Or did the Spanish just make it up? Were they exaggerating things to make the Aztecs look more barbaric? The wooden poles that once held the skulls had rotted away, but the post holes were still there. Nearby, they found something even stranger. Skulls mortared together in circles, all facing inward toward an empty space in the center. To this day, nobody knows what was supposed to go there. The platform was partly excavated under the floor of a 3-story house. Because the building was historically valuable, archaeologists had to work in these narrow excavation wells about 6 feet below the floor, laying on their stomachs on wooden platforms. Sounds fun. By 2020, they'd found over 600 skulls in the tower structure, skulls of men, women, and children, which was surprising for some of the researchers who were only expecting to find male warriors. Eduardo Matos explained the whole point was psychological warfare. Aztecs would invite friends and, more importantly, enemies into the city. They'd make sure to show them this rack of decomposing heads. Certainly one way to keep people from messing with you. In Naples Cathedral, there's a relic supposedly containing the dried blood of Saint Januarius, a bishop who was martyred around 305 CE. The blood sits in 2 glass vials inside a silver shrine. 3 times a year, massive crowds pack into the cathedral to watch if it'll liquefy. The dates are specific: the Saturday before the first Sunday in May, September 19th, and December 16th. The first documented time anyone wrote about it liquefying was back in 1389. On September 19th, 2024, Archbishop Domenico Battaglia held up the vial and declared it had turned to liquid again, saying, quote, "Every drop of this blood speaks to us of the love of God." When it doesn't liquefy though, some see it as a bad omen. War, plague, disaster, something bad is coming. Vials normally sit locked in a vault and only get brought out for these ceremonies. Whether you think it's a miracle or not, thousands of people show up every time, and the attention in that cathedral must be insane. When US forces entered Baghdad in 2003, reports claimed the Iraq Museum had been completely looted. 170,000 artifacts gone. But much of that was wrong. Museum staff had secretly moved their most valuable pieces before the invasion. Some treasures had been hidden as far back as the First Gulf War in 1991. About 8,000 pieces from public galleries were packed into boxes and stored in secret vaults, possibly still on the museum grounds. In June 2003, US officials announced they'd found the treasures of Nimrud in a flooded vault under the Iraqi central bank. These included gold objects from Assyrian royal tombs dating to the 8th and 9th centuries BCE. National Geographic helped pump out the water, revealing 613 pieces of gold jewelry and ornaments, all in pretty good condition. Some bodies of looters were even found inside, apparently rival gangs who'd fought over access. The final count, about 15,000 items actually went missing, not 170,000. The Warka vase, a key piece in art history, turned up in the trunk of a Volkswagen. Thousands of years, people assumed the Great Pyramid of Giza had no secrets left to reveal, but in 2017, scientists using cosmic ray detectors, those are real, actually, not from a science fiction movie, well, they announced they'd found a massive void inside the pyramid that nobody knew existed. The Scan Pyramids project used muon tomography, basically using particles from space that constantly rain down on Earth to see through solid stone. Muons pass through empty spaces more easily than solid rock, so by setting up detectors in different locations, scientists can map out voids. 3 separate teams used 3 different types of detectors, and all of them picked up the same signal: a space above the Grand Gallery at least 30 meters long, with a cross-section similar to the gallery itself. This is the first major internal structure discovered since the 19th century. The Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities was not thrilled about the announcement though. Zahi Hawass, the former Minister of Antiquities, immediately said they'd found nothing and that the paper offered 0 to Egyptology. He argued that there are lots of voids in the pyramid, stress relief chambers built into the structure to distribute weight. He said the team didn't understand pyramid construction, but the team running Scan Pyramids disagrees. They're confident in their data, but they also acknowledge there's some uncertainty about the exact purpose of the void. They won't speculate about what's in there until more scanning is done from different angles. The raw scan data and exact technical specifications haven't been fully released to the public. The researchers want to continue scanning before anyone talks about trying to access the chamber physically. On July 3rd, 1908, Italian archaeologist Luigi Pernier was excavating the Palace of Phaistos on Crete when he found something that's confused experts ever since. It's a clay disc about 6 inches across, covered on both sides with symbols arranged in a spiral pattern. Nobody can read it. The Phaistos disc has 242 symbols made up of 45 distinct signs. What makes it unique is that these symbols weren't carved or scratched into the clay, they were actually stamped. Someone created individual stamps for each symbol and pressed them into soft clay before firing it. This makes it possibly the earliest example of movable type printing. The symbols show human figures, animals, plants, tools, and geometric shapes. Some look vaguely like other Minoan scripts, but there are huge differences. It's possibly from around 1700 BCE, the Middle Minoan period, but even that's debated. And here's the fundamental problem. This is a one-of-a-kind artifact. I mean, you need multiple examples to crack an unknown script, and this is the only object with these particular symbols. There have been hundreds of interpretations over the years. Some think it's a hymn or a prayer, maybe a game board, a calendar, or or a forgery. One archaeologist in 2008 thought that Bernier faked it to compete with other famous discoveries at the time. What makes this particularly frustrating is that if we could read it, we might learn an enormous amount about Minoan civilization, but until then, this thing is just a total mystery. Easter Island is known for its giant stone heads, but the Rapa Nui also created a writing system called Rongo Rongo. Today, fewer than 30 wooden tablets are around, scattered across museums throughout the world. None remain on the island itself. In the 1860s, Peruvian slave raids kidnapped most of the island's priests and chiefs, the people who knew how to read Rongo Rongo. Then there was smallpox, and by the 1870s, traditional culture was destroyed, along with the knowledge of the script. The tablets that survive are extremely fragile. The Berlin tablet, over 3 feet long, is so eroded that more than half is unreadable. Researchers now rely on photos and 3D scans to try and study the inscriptions.